Welcome to Leaders of Land and Legacy, presented by JABC, where we engage Indigenous business leaders from across British Columbia to explore work readiness, financial health, and entrepreneurship. If you want to learn what makes these leaders successful and how you can apply these lessons to your own life, then you're in the right place. I'm Jacqueline, and in today's episode, we will be exploring breaking barriers, building work readiness and financial confidence with Ellis Ross, a respected leader of the Haisla Nation and former member of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. Thank you, Mr. Ross, for joining us today. Let's dive in. So, Mr. Ross, would you mind sharing your journey with us, and how did you get where you are today?
Uh, it was actually not by design. I got elected to council in 2003, and I had no idea what I was getting into. But at the time, I was coaching boys and girls basketball teams, so I thought I could take some of council's resources and divert it to my basketball teams. And when I got into council, it took me about 6 months to realize my council had no money. We're in severe debt. We didn't have any real organizational structure. So it went from there. And then after a while, after about a year, my council asked me to go full time, work for them as an elected representative full time every day to help out with day-to-day operations and help out the chief councilor. So the problem with that is they never quite explained to me what I was supposed to do. I basically set out my own days, and I decided to read up on everything about the Indian Act, government structures, the economy, but with a primary focus on Aboriginal rights and title through reconciliation, not the political reconciliation you see now out in the media, but real reconciliation based on the courts. And so I became a counselor. I became chair of the treaty negotiations and a bunch of other different committees. But the one thing I did refuse to do once I figured out the lay of the land, I refused to participate in anything related to the Indian Act. I refused it. It was just a waste of time. And we just had us going around in circles. So I didn't participate in any federal housing programs, any provincial programs. I didn't participate in any of that. And I made it clear I don't want to do any of that. I want to do something that helps individual people. And so that's what I did for 8 years. I just basically researched, read, interviewed people, analyzed different topics, and that's what basically set the table for being chief counselor in 2011 to 2017.
Wow, that's so interesting. And the way you handled that was really inspiring. And you mentioned that you love coaching. How and when did you discover that joy?
My basketball career was actually a pretty good career itself. I became a good player in my teenage years, but as I got older, I had two daughters, and I realized there's no junior girls basketball team for 17 and under in my village anymore. So I decided to bring that back. But I brought it back under strict guidelines. My players had to be committed, they had to have discipline, and they had to show sacrifice and commitment. And so teaching life skills along with basketball. And then as word got out that I had this specific program in mind, boys asked me to coach them, then young men asked me to coach them, and then the older men asked me to coach them, and senior ladies asked me to coach them. And just recently, I just got through coaching 35 and over ladies in the Prince Rupert basketball tournament. And these ladies hadn't played in 20 years. And that was tough. But I always melded the idea of basketball versus your pathway in life. I saw similarities, tremendous similarities, especially with what we were dealing with back then, which was mainly alcohol and cocaine. Now it's even more relevant with all that crystal meth and fentanyl out there and heroin. So it's come full circle.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. And it's truly inspiring how you ended up doing all of that, and especially the reasoning behind why you got into it. So, your journey has taken you from working as a water taxi operator, then to serving as chief counselor of the Haisla Nation, and then later as an MLP. What would you say were some key skills that helped you navigate these transitions? And what advice would you give to young Indigenous leaders who are hoping to build their own path?
It's MLA for the BC legislature, a member of the Legislative Assembly. You know, the one thing I always trace it back to is understanding how to communicate. And that means give and take. I often ask this question to people. I know you know how to hear. You can hear me, but can you listen? Can you comprehend? Can you take the main point or a main idea out of a subject matter and actually build on that? Can you do that? I see most of the problems that we have today is not our differences because people just don't know how to communicate. And that's what leads to lousy politics. What really got me going in that was in grade 10, English. I wasn't a very good student. I focused entirely on basketball, and I failed grade 8 math 3 times because I just wouldn't put in the work effort. I felt when I got into high school in grade 8, I felt very dumb. I failed a math test,
Mm.
and I was so embarrassed and so ashamed. I just gave up. I said, "Ah, forget this. I don't need this." So I'd go to class, I'd go to sleep. I wouldn't do homework, and I got pushed through the system. Well, in grade 10, an English teacher came to the back of the class to where I was sitting, and he told me outright. He said, you're not as dumb as you think you are. I tell you what, if I show you how to write an essay, will you give it 100%? And I'll show you, I'll prove to you that you're a smart guy. I said, okay. So grade 10, young guy. So we shook hands. And he showed me how to research. He showed me how to read a paragraph. He showed me how to read an article, and he showed me how to write. Remember when people used to write essays? I did that. I wrote an essay
Yeah, all
with
by
a
hand.
pen. With a pen.
Then your hand starts cramping up.
Yeah. But having to go to the library and research the tsetse fly from
Mhm.
Africa and reading all those articles and all those encyclopedias and then putting together a 3 page essay. And I did exactly what he told me to do. And so I got an A plus on that essay. And so I passed English, and then I started doing more in terms of trying to understand language and trying to understand how to communicate. And it helped me immensely in everything I did. Everything, whether you're talking about a boat operator where you had to read a manual for the engines, or you had to read political documents for chief and council, or as an MLA, and even just in my private life, the ability to communicate and read and comprehend is one of the things I credit mostly with where I got to today.
That was a fantastic answer. Yeah, communication really does dictate not only the community that you're able to build, but also the success you're able to find in life. So thank you so much for sharing that. How might you suggest that young people could start developing these communication skills if they don't have any direct leadership or business experience?
For young people, especially today, I don't subscribe to the idea that a young person has to know what they want to be. I don't go down the road. If you do have your pathway picked out, great. That's awesome. That's incredible to be a young person and know that you want to be an accountant or you want to be a lawyer or you want to be a soldier. You want to do that stuff. That is perfect. But if you're not sure what you want to do and you want to keep your options open, that's good too. I still don't know what I want to be, and I'm 59 years old. But the one thing I do emphasize is don't make bad choices. Don't make bad decisions, even if you don't know what you want to be. But if you can envision yourself 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now on what you think your life should be looking like, and maybe it's, oh, I'm traveling the world. Oh, I'm driving a big pickup truck. No, no, I got a house over in Kelowna someplace. Whatever it is, great, keep that there. That's a great vision to have. But don't make the bad choices of saying, I want to experiment with marijuana, or maybe I should try cocaine. Those are bad choices. I mean, even with what I did, like I grew up on reserve, so you couldn't get away from this. But even then, when I made those bad choices for drugs and alcohol, I knew in my heart it was the wrong decision, but I did it anyway because everybody did it. But I did know at a young age, I didn't want to be wandering around my village for the rest of my life, smoking dope, drinking booze. And so, in a way, I was trying to envision what am I going to do then? Well, first of all, I got to stop doing these drugs, which I did. And
That's
then
amazing.
as I took that out of my life, good things started to happen. It wasn't miraculous. It wasn't overnight. I wouldn't make a movie on it, but I did notice that most of the bad stuff that happened in my life came from my bad decisions.
Yeah, so you really emphasize you always got to keep moving forward, and the people you surround yourself really dictate that. So it kind of brings it back to the beginning of communicating with the community around you and how that dictates your success. Thank you
Yes.
for that. It's a fantastic answer. So, every leader faces challenges. You touched on yours a little bit. Would you be able to share a difficult moment in your business or leadership journey and what you learned from that?
Oh, I was a counselor in my village, and we were promoting liquid natural gas to be exported through our territory. We were advocating heavily for it. And in our community, like every small community, we had small town politics happening, and it got out of hand. It got out of control. And my village, my community divided itself in two. One half supported the council, and the other half didn't support. And so all these wild accusations came out. We were stealing money, we were taking bribes, we're selling out our future, we're doing secret negotiation. Everything came out, everything you can imagine. It actually ended up in court. The court case is called Wilson versus Switlow. Our opposition hired an ex-lawyer out of BC that lives in Alberta to come and basically lead this fight against us. And Wilson is actually the chief counselor of our community at the time. Anyway, it tore our community apart. Families wouldn't talk to family, friends wouldn't talk to friends, basketball teammates wouldn't talk to each other on the court. It got really bad. And it got so bad that one of the initiatives that was proposed was to bring in 200 Gurkha soldiers to our community to keep the peace. And the Gurkha refers to a knife that they have, a Gurkha knife, and a whole pile of different things. And when I saw this happening, I first had a sense it was something was wrong because my dad was hereditary chief. And one day I'm in the office and I get this letter sent to me. And it was from the hereditary chiefs. There's four of them at the time. And it basically said, you guys got to stop taking bribes. You got to stop doing secret negotiations. You got to. And my dad signed it, my own dad. So I went down. I took the letter. Went down to his house and met with him, and my mom, and I showed him the letter. I said, "Do you know you accused me of stealing money, taking bribes, and doing secret negotiations? Do you know that?" He said, "No, I didn't. I asked you for an update on the cemetery and an update on treaty negotiations." I said, "No, you didn't." And so I read him the letter, and he was shocked that he signed that letter. And my mom was angry. So my mom told him never to go around those chiefs again. And I told my dad at the time, I said, you guys are falsely accusing elected leaders. You have no evidence. Anyway, that was the worst time of my life. And when the judge ruling came back and found those people that were doing that were guilty of libel, a lot of our counselors broke down and cried because we went through years of this, people calling us down and accusing of us horrible things. And the judge at the end said it was just a political stunt. That's all it was. It wasn't based on reality. That was the worst time of my life. And if anything, what I learned was human nature is hard to deal with when you're dealing with politics. It's extremely hard, but you've got to keep your head about you. You've got to know that through the worst of it, you got to keep your integrity. You got to keep your character. You can't let this drag you down. You can't be one of the crowd and just say, "Oh, that's just the way it goes." We've recovered, I'd say, probably 90% of the way now, our community. But it was one of the worst times of my life.
That is so crazy. Wow, yeah, you really got to hold to your values in that type of situation, especially just when you're going on to building different businesses and working with all these different communities. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's your family
yeah.
and your friends you grew up with, and they believe that you're a crook. They believe it. That is heartbreaking.
Very disheartening situation to be in. And it's difficult too, because there's not many ways that you can figure out, well, how am I supposed to navigate it? It's all just kind of learning and moving forward from there. So it kind of brings it back to what you were saying before. If you gotta just keep moving forward, keep a head on your shoulders.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, since not everyone grows up learning about money, what would you suggest would be a good way for young people to start building financial skills and confidence?
Number one, read.
Okay.
It's interesting you bring this up because I'm actually dealing with a company now that talks about all the services that financial institutions and banks provide, but nobody understands how they work. So this company is now going saying, look, we're going to educate you on these financial tools that you can use based on your place in life right now. And so it's actually quite interesting. I did an interview with them last week. I'm going to do another one next week. And so they want to show exactly what it means to have a treasury bill, for example, or a bond or stocks. And so this is something that First Nations don't get on reserve. You don't get uh, the detail of how to invest money. We tried to do this, by the way, when we knew that some of our band members were going to get a big chunk of money at one time. So we brought in a lady from the banking institution, and we invited all these people that were going to get this money. And she started going over, how to protect your money, what a trust is, what a checking account is, what a savings account is. And a guy got up in the back and he said, "Hey, what are you guys doing? This is our money. Why are you guys trying to tell us what to do?" And I got up and I said, "We're not trying to tell you what to do. We're just trying to say there's ways to invest your money, there's ways to protect it." And so, no, no, we don't need your advice. They all got up and walked out. So I don't know what it is. I'm guilty of it too. But if you're afraid of the unknown, and I think a lot of people, not just First Nations, but a lot of people don't really want to know what it really means to invest or what money is really about. But yet you look at the financially wealthy people, they all understand money and how to use it instead of just spend, 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 spend. Or they know the difference between good debt and bad debt. And so I suggest taking these courses, very preliminary, foundational courses, and then go from there.
Yeah, that's so unfortunate, though. What would be some books that you might recommend? Because you said reading is one of the best ways to gain that sort of knowledge.
You know what? I haven't read a book in probably 15 years. Uh, I read a lot of articles. I read a lot of essays. I watch a lot of YouTube. I read a lot of historical documents. I like reading archives from history. I guess I'm just like everybody else. I don't have the patience to sit through a big novel anymore. I don't read fiction anymore. This job has killed me for fiction and has killed my artistic side of me as well. But yeah, my interest is really on a specific information for a specific topic, which is really hard to do. I try to find facts, and that's really hard to do, which is quite ironic, is because this is the age of information, but there's so much information out there that's not correct or is slanted, taken out of context. So it takes a while to find that unbiased information. But I'll take information wherever I can get it. I'll even go talk to people. I'll talk to lawyers. I'll talk to accountants. I'll talk to other political leaders and get their take on things, and try to get a large number of opinions and narratives, and try to figure out, what's the right answer.
You really got to be critical with the information that you're taking in. It's unfortunate that a lot of people are reluctant to accept that help because most of the time you can either take the information or you can learn from it and move in a different path. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Even the distasteful topics,
Exactly.
even the distasteful, you got to take that. I know it might be offensive, but you're not going to get a clear picture unless you get a broad spectrum of opinions out there. And some of those opinions might contradict yours quite strongly, but that's a good thing.
It's an important situation to put yourself in to learn how to navigate everything in an effective way. Thank
Yes.
you for that. So, what would you say would be some of the biggest challenges that Indigenous entrepreneurs might face when trying to get funding? And how would you suggest that they may be able to overcome them?
I don't think it's as hard as before. There's been a lot of barriers lifted, and there's been a lot of programs developed specifically for First Nations, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. And it's been made a lot easier. Back when we were starting back in 2003, we couldn't get a credit rating with our bank. Even though we had money in the bank, we had for years, they wouldn't give us a loan. We just had no credit rating. And there was no programs back then from government specifically to First Nations. You had to go apply for the program, and you had to write reports, and you had to do all kinds of, you had to jump through hoops. And even there was a chunk of money given to British Columbia natives called the First New Relationship Fund. And that was $100 million.
Mm.
But even that $100 million, they just lived off the interest. They didn't live off the principal. And so that was supposed to be for 204 bands in BC. And so on and on and on. Everything in First Nations territory at the time was applications driven and report driven and under a very paternalistic system where government would penalize you if you did bad in your financial initiatives. And to a certain extent, they'd punish you if you did well. Today, I mean, there's so many banks out there now that want to lend money to First Nations. It does help if your band council is open to the idea of working with a financial institution. I'll give you an example. On our reserve, which is Crown land, basically, it's held in trust for natives by the federal government. So you can't really own property on reserve. But what we figured out was because we had a huge housing deficit, our people wouldn't pay their housing bill. We had close to $600,000 in debt. But as we brought in more and more jobs, we noticed younger people just wanted to own a home. They didn't want nothing to do with the council. So we developed a relationship with the bank and said, look, if you give this person and all these other people mortgages, we'll guarantee those mortgages. And we'll basically put in the same rules for these mortgages on reserve as you would off reserve. And so when we introduced this program, because you got to remember our people started making really good money through LNG and Rio Tinto Alcan and forestry. And they all started going after mortgages. So you don't own the land, but you own the house. And we saw a transformation in terms of the way they thought about that house, the way they thought about their mortgage. They looked after their house a lot better, and they had a responsibility. They were more interested in their credit rating with a bank as opposed to a house under the Indian Act. So there's different ways your council can work with different institutions and different organizations to actually make it a lot easier.
That was a fantastic way to navigate that situation. You really gave so many people opportunities. Oh, thank
Yes.
you so much for sharing that. And just to follow that up, are there any funding programs or resources that you'd personally recommend for young Indigenous entrepreneurs?
Oh, geez. Take your pick. Take your pick. There's so many out there now. Like I mostly focused on major projects for financing. So in the beginning, nobody wanted to give us money. In the beginning, we were actually entertaining the idea of going out for $600 million a loan for our small band, and we really couldn't find it. Then over the years, we started to see different financial institutions moving into Canada, wanting to basically invest in Canada, but they couldn't invest in Canada because the major banks had that investment locked up. So they needed another doorway into the investment community. So they came to First Nations and said, "Hey, we lend you the money at this interest level. You know, you can invest in some of the projects you're talking about." There's so many different pots of funding out there right now, but it does help when you get a good knowledge of the institution, and it does help if you know that your council backs us up and supports you. That's huge. But there's other organizations as well that can support you. There's the First Nations LNG Alliance. There's the First Nations Major Projects Alliance. There's the National Coalition of Hereditary Chiefs out of Alberta. There's the Indian Resource Council out of Alberta. There's so many great organizations now that are actually the front lines of investment and financial borrowing and lending for that matter. So it's easy to find them.
Seems like there's a variety of paths that you can take and ways to navigate that. And it
Yes.
seems like it almost always comes back to resilience and taking initiative. What would you say would be some mindset shifts that you think would be most important for young Indigenous entrepreneurs who are hoping to succeed?
Be bold.
Okay.
Be bold. Take a risk. But know this, and I've said this a number of times to First Nation people who want to take up business, it's not going to be handed to you. Owning your own business is not an 8 to 4 job. It's 7 days a week. It could be anywhere from 10 to 12 to 14-hour days. But the more you put into it, the more you're going to get in return. That's what the nature of business is, and especially today in today's business climate. But you do have the advantage that everybody wants to do business with First Nations now. The major projects want to bring in more First Nation workers and companies. The governments claim they want to do more work with First Nation companies, but their policies haven't caught up just yet. But the main point is everybody wants to see First Nations involved now. So you've got a great opportunity, but you got to be committed. Even non-First Nations people that figure I'm going to start a business and they don't put in the work, and then they end up going bankrupt right away. And even a chef will tell you, that runs his own restaurant, the chef will never stop working. They're planning out the next day's menu. They're shopping. They're going over their employee list and their employee conditions. They're going through everything. The reward is great if you're going to get into business, but you've got to be committed, and you've got to be committed to making sacrifices at the same time.
You really got to be dedicated to your craft and you got to persevere even when things get difficult. Do you have any suggestions of how people could develop this sort of perseverance or this sort of dedication?
Um, well, people that have done something before, a former discipline, and my former discipline is sports, and same thing as business, as in life. With sports, you don't succeed unless you put the work in. You don't, and you don't succeed if you don't keep learning. You got to know what your strengths are. You got to know what your weaknesses are, and it's best to work on your weaknesses, to complement your strengths. It's the same thing with business, but there's a tremendous amount of resources out there. But it doesn't have to be just sports. If you did something in your past that you were really committed to and you made sacrifice for and you saw success with that, that is the kind of mentality you need for business. That's the kind of mentality you need for, say, not just business, but being a good employee for a company. You want a good life, that applies. You got to put something into it. You got to make the effort. Unfortunately, with business, I mean, it's a tremendous amount of effort, depending on what field you get into.
Crazy. It almost comes back to who you are, even outside of business, just in all the other areas of your life. So
Oh,
thank
yeah.
you for that comparison between sports. That's a fantastic example.
Okay.
And one final closing thought. What would be one piece of financial advice that you'd give to someone who's just starting out? And why would you give them this advice?
You know what? You're just getting started. Look after your money. Respect your money, especially if you worked hard for it. I know in this day and age of consumerism, you want the next cool thing, but break it down in terms of what you need versus what you want. Uh, what you need is a roof over your head. You need clothes on your back. You need to eat, right? That's need. But do you really need that motorcycle when you already have a car? Do you really need that skateboard? Do you need that surfboard at this point in your life? I mean, I do it all the time. Compulsive buying, especially on Amazon. That's horrible. 1 o'clock in the morning, you got nothing to do. Hey, that's pretty cool. Click. Then when it arrives at your doorstep, why did I buy this? But really understand money. If you worked hard to get it, don't let it slip so easily through your fingers, and go talk to somebody about what it means to have money and how to keep that money and how to build that money. When I was a young man, I didn't have much opportunity for a job. There was no jobs in our area, and I was living on reserve. And I finally got a job. I was working as a laborer for Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So after a few months, I've got some money. I got some spare money, and I've got a wife. No kids just yet, but I got a wife, and I'm in a electronics store, Terrace, and I'm only 20 years old. So I'm looking. I've always wanted a stereo. I always wanted a nice stereo. So I'm looking at this stereo, and the stereo is $800. That was a lot of money back then, especially if you were kind of poor like me. So the guy comes up to me and says, "Oh, you like a stereo?" I said, "Yeah, it's a great stereo." And turn it on, crank up the bass, and oh, it's a great stereo. I love the stereo. Plays records, by the way, and tape cassettes. You need a different seminar to explain what that is. But I'm so excited, and I tell the guy, but I got no money. I can probably put down 150 bucks, but I got no money. He said, "Don't worry about it. I'll fill out this application form for you, and we'll go submit it, and we'll see if you get accepted for this loan. Oh, cool, nice. So he goes in the back room. This old guy comes over to me. He's been listening to us. He goes, "Hey, young fella, do you know what credit is?" No. He said, "What that guy's going to do, he's going to approve you for a loan, but you're going to pay 18% on that loan. Do you know what 18% is on $800?" I said, "No." He said, "You know what? Turn around, walk out, and go read up on what credit is."
Mm.
Oh, okay. So I walked out. I didn't buy the stereo. And then I researched credit. And I thought, oh my God, I dodged a bullet. And that was it was bad debt. I had no idea what I was doing. I probably would have been still paying that stereo off today. But such a basic concept that our kids aren't learning today. I think that's one of the things that you should learn in school
Mhm.
is the basics of finance.
That guy's advice truly made such a difference. And it's
Yeah.
crazy in our day and age as well. There's almost like a huge emphasis on immediate gratification. So thank you for bringing up the point that delayed gratification is one of the things that's going to guide you towards success.
Yeah. Okay.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Ross. It was amazing speaking with you and hearing about all the things that you're doing. And we're so lucky to have you as our guest.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Thanks for listening to Leaders of Land and Legacy presented by JABC. To learn more about our programs, visit jabc.org.